On this video, I want to discuss a little bit Parshat Vayishlach, where Esau and Yaakov meet again after 20 years that they didn't see each other. And in particular, there is one word here that has dots on the top. Of course, everybody knows that the way our Torah scrolls are written, it's only the consonants that are written. So even what we usually call nikudot, which is the vowels, are not written in the text. In the printed editions, of course, the vowels are written, but this is part of oral law. The written Torah only has the consonants. And there are a few dots all over the Torah. In the entire Chumash, there are just a few places, a handful of places where there are some dots. Sometimes on one letter, sometimes on an entire word or even a few words. And in particular, in our weekly reading, there are dots on top of the word that Esau kissed Yaakov. So dots are usually to bring some kind of attention. There are different opinions, and each one is treated ad hoc by our sages, but in particular, these dots are trying to tell us something. Kind of like we do underlining words in English, or maybe make it bold, or some other way of making this word stand out. So when Esau kisses Yaakov, the word is dotted. And there is an interesting dispute in the Midrash that Rashi brings, that some say that the dots are there to say that Esau did not kiss Yaakov sincerely. And others say exactly the opposite. And this is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai claims, that usually Esau hates Yaakov. The norm is Esau always hated Yaakov, but at this point he actually had a kind of a change of mind or something. He saw Yaakov's effort to try to please him, and he actually had pity on him, and he actually kissed him sincerely. So this interesting idea that usually Esau hates Yaakov is understood by a lot of commentators to mean a more general situation of the Jews in the world, and in particular in Western civilization. I already spoke about it in one of the earlier videos, that the Western civilization oftentimes is related to Edom one way or another, at least in our theology. Edom, the relatively small nation that used to be next to Judah, next to Israel, somewhere in today's Jordan, that nation began to be associated with the entire mighty Roman Empire and the entire Western world, which is the continuation of the Roman Empire. And therefore, the general situation that we're being hated, unfortunately, is considered to be a kind of situation that's just going to happen. This is what cannot be avoided. There was a certain sage that died in Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust, was murdered together with so many Jews. And he used to say, for instance, it's brought in a book called Ateret HaMikra. Rabbi Menachem Zembo was his name. Maybe some people heard about him. So he used to say that Jews are often hated for the reasons that are mutually exclusive. Right? It's impossible to imagine. Let's say those who are against the left claim that the Jews are too much on the left. Those who are against the right say that there's too many capitalists, communists, capitalists. Every kind of situation, you choose that Jew that in your mind is the worst, and he becomes the representative, the standard, and that's how Jews are. So this is how, unfortunately, again, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of times in the West, that's what happens. In general, the Western civilization, in the words of our sages, is considered very hypocritical, and we see it today as well. A lot of times the hypocrisy is simply impossible to believe, and all kinds of labels, all kinds of libels are said against the Jews. I mean, one of the very well-known ones is we're poisoning the wells in order for the society around us to die. This was at the time when a lot of people were dying in Europe from epidemics. So it's the Jews, the Jewish fault. Although Jews also died. Maybe less because the Jews were generally cleaner and had a higher level of hygiene, but they died. Everybody dies when there's epidemics. Nobody wants epidemics. By the way, there were some conspiracy theories that tried to blame COVID on the Jews, but I think that didn't really pick up last time. But other libels that that were said against us throughout history picked up and seem to be extremely long-living. You'd expect, for instance, that today in 21st century, nobody would believe the blood libel that we use blood of Christian children into matzah. But believe it or not, there are still people who claim that, and even on sometimes lectures on university campuses. There was a scandal just recently in England that a certain lecturer made that claim. So it's unbelievable. I mean, the whole thing makes so little sense. Matzah is the most simple food imaginable. It's bread, it's basically water and flour. Nothing is added to matzah. It's impossible to imagine the production of matzah where you'd need blood of somebody. Besides that, we forbid every kind of blood for food consumption. We're the nation that is the most strict regarding any kind of blood in the food. But altogether, the whole idea, how is it even possible? Imagine that for a second that the Jews would try to get blood of Christians in order to produce matzah. I mean, the whole thing is so dangerous even to assume, and how many people would need to be killed every time there's Passover in order to produce all that blood. The whole thing is just so unbelievably, ridiculously stupid. And yet people believe that, and there's so many Jews who were killed because of it, were tortured. Some admitted under torture, right? Under torture, some people would admit anything. I'm a weak person. I would certainly admit anything under torture. It's almost impossible to be strong when a person is tortured and not to admit. So there were people admitting under torture. Yes, we use Christian blood for matzah. And these types of blood libels were incredibly long-living, and unfortunately even exist today. I mean, the more common one, of course, I'm not claiming that a lot of people today believe in that blood libel, but a lot more common one today is this idea that supposedly the Jews are hunting the people of Gaza to destroy them and to commit genocide against them. I mean, just a simple calculation, very simple. Everybody agrees that the number of soldiers throughout these 2 years of war in Gaza were more than 10,000. But we'll take the least limit. Let's say there was 10,000 soldiers, and each one would kill somebody once a week. That's not how wars are fought. That's not how generally the soldiers operate. But if, let's say, they would have an idea, well, I'm not even talking about specifically hunting down civilians in Gaza. I'm saying even just ignoring whether it's a civilian or not, just killing somebody once in a week. Certainly, the soldiers could easily accomplish that if they wanted to. One person a week, 10,000 people. So in more than 100 weeks, in 2 years, each person would kill about 100 Gazans, right? So 10,000 people, each one killing 100 people, that's 1 million people. So 1 million Gazans would die if even once a week, just once a week, a soldier would kill somebody. That's how much. This is a very simple calculation, by the way. Everybody could do it. It's so simple when the society that's over 2 million people, and the war is going on for 2 years. Certainly, if there was any desire for Israel to hunt down and kill the innocent civilians, there would be tons more deaths, even if you believe the numbers that Hamas provides. Now, the numbers that Hamas provides and that most of the media swallows and quotes without any kind of discretion, those numbers are wrong for sure. There are so many contradictions in these numbers. So much was proven already that these numbers are simply wrong. I mean, even in the beginning of the war, Hamas claimed that Israel bombed a hospital when it was really their own bomb, Islamic Jihad's bomb, that fell in the hospital. And also they claimed the number of casualties as 10 times as much as really people that died that time. So this is done all the time. Hamas lies all the time. This is a terrorist organization. For them, it's a feature, it's a strategy, it's a type of tactics to have as many civilians killed as possible, and to blame Israel for every civilian killed, whether they themselves kill this person, whether this person dies from any other cause, they're always killed. And by the way, who are considered civilians? That's another thing. Hamas is very commonly caught on this type of situation, that a person, let's say 18-year-old with an automatic gun, but not not wearing military uniform, and then when this person is killed, they take his picture without a gun, and they say, okay, a child was killed. This is happening all the time. Hamas is just liars. You can't rely on any of their figures. But even according to their figures, about 70,000 Gazans died in over 2 million population in 2 years. Is that how genocide looks to you? Does that sound? For example, the Germans that were trying to gather Jews from all over the place, it was much harder. You had to choose and separate the Jews from every kind of country and bring them to specific camps where they would be killed. And still they were able to kill relatively few numbers of Germans who actually were in these camps like Auschwitz, were able to kill 12,000 a day. 12,000 a day. That's how genocide looks like. If 70,000 people are killed throughout 2 years of war, that's not genocide. Israel was sending thousands of messages, giving maps, throwing down papers with maps, all kinds of ways, phone calls to tell the Gazans where to go to try to save them from Hamas and from being caught in this war. But Hamas was using it as a strategy. But the surprise is not that Hamas is doing it. The surprise is how hypocritical is the New York Times, the BBC, and the other media. That they're quoting all these figures and they're blaming Israel. By the way, this way they increase the incentive. Everybody does things according to the incentive. If Hamas would see that this doesn't work, they wouldn't continue doing it. But because they see it works, any kind of accusation against Israel is picked up by the media and indiscretionally spread all over. So of course they'll continue doing it. So this is the special rectification that the Christian world and the Western world in general has to work on. The removal of that terrible bias. We see that some of the great leaders of the Western countries, in this particular case it's Argentina, it's South America, but it's also a type of Western country, mostly for descendants of immigrants from Europe. At any rate, the head of Argentina, Milei, very interesting person, and he just recently made a speech. He always says these types of things, but the recent speech I recommended, it's a very interesting speech. He specifically says that we will support Israel because it's good for us too. This is what we need to fix. This is what our culture has to be built on. If you don't support Israel, you're gonna go in the same direction as USSR, Iran, every kind of country that made it its goal to destroy Israel. And again, I'm not talking about two-state solution. That's a separate discussion. Two-state solution was offered many times to the Arabs. If they would want two-state solution, then it would have already happened a long time ago. But we're talking about people who don't want Israel in any borders. They want a Holocaust of Israel. That's what they're basically saying. All these demonstrations, when they say from river to the sea, they want destruction of Israel. And it's already over 70 years since UN voted for Israel. And in that war, the Arabs tried to destroy every Jew. If they would win, there would be no Jews. There would be another Holocaust. But they lost. And there were some people who became refugees. The Jews never treated the Arabs the same way as, for instance, the Russians or the Czechs and other Eastern Europeans, the Poles, treated Germans, for example. The numbers of Germans that were expelled, the millions of people who were expelled from their homes, whose territory was taken away by these countries today. For instance, Kaliningrad is a city in Russia. There were millions of Germans who were expelled out of there, and nobody cared. And just 2-3 years later, Israel had a war with Arabs when Arabs tried to destroy every Jew. And there were some Arabs who ended up being in other countries, and they became perpetual refugees. An exclusion of the case when every other refugee is for one generation, but these are perpetual refugees who are growing in number. All other refugees are taken care of other agencies of UN, and there's one agency that deals only with the so-called Palestinian refugees. At that time they weren't called Palestinians, they became Palestinians later. But these Arab refugees, at that time they actually admitted that they became refugees because of the Arabs who told them to leave. Now there were some people who were expelled, but this wasn't a lot of people. And again, the way that normally those who support the enemy are treated, the Jews treated the Arabs much better than the Germans were treated, or even the Italians. A lot of the people in Croatia today live in the places where there used to be Italians. Hundreds of thousands of Italians were expelled. Jews from all Arab countries practically were expelled at that time. And by the way, their money was taken away as well. And again, even in the land of Israel, the Jews who lived in, for instance, in the old city of Jerusalem and other places, they were also expelled, those who survived. The Jordanians who conquered it back then, they expelled all the Jews. And yet today, even when the two-state solution is discussed, and by the way, the so-called Palestinians, whenever they accept something, they never even mean to fulfill anything that they accept. And they openly say it. Arafat used to say in Arabic something very different than what he used to say in English. But among other things, the idea was that if there will be a two-state solution, that the Jews would have access to the holy sites in the Palestinian state. None of that is kept. None of that was fulfilled. And at any rate, even with that, the Jews were offering Arafat pretty much almost all of the territory that was liberated during the Six-Day War. The war when, again, the Arabs were trying to destroy all the Jews. And they said it openly, and when the Jews, Jordania actually was told specifically, don't fight us, we won't fight you. And they started the war. And then the Jews got those areas. By the way, there was no Palestinian state there either. It's not like Jordan, when they had those areas, made it a Palestinian state. But at any rate, when Jews got those areas, they did not expel the Arabs, they still lived there. And the Jews were willing to give them a state. But under the condition that they'll stop terrorism. They didn't stop terrorism. All these Oslo Accords, none of it was fulfilled by the other party. If they wanted a true state next to a Jewish state, that would have happened a long time ago. There were left type of governments in Israel with a majority mandate, and they would have, under, for instance, Ehud Barak, they would have given Arafat almost everything that he wanted in terms of the territory of the state. But it never happened because they don't believe in a two-state solution. Our mayor, future mayor in New York, does not believe in a two-state solution. This is a guy who is elected in New York City. So what do they want? These are people who not just that they want a Palestinian state. They don't want to have any Jewish state. They don't want Jews to have a state. And they want the Jews to be destroyed. That's what these people are. Some of them don't maybe realize exactly the implications, but that's what they're basically saying. That all the states would be Arab states. By the way, there are a number of Arab states today where most Arabs support Israel in some borders at the very least. So the situation today in the West is even worse than in some of the Arab countries. Really unbelievable that the mayor of New York is more anti-Israel than an average person in, let's say, United Arab Emirates or many other Muslim countries. This is really unbelievable situation. What we would expect from the West and its values, which are shared generally by Israel, is to point out on every kind of video about Israel and Gaza conflict that this is a civilization fighting barbarism, that the people of Gaza deserve better than Hamas, that they are treated in the most cruel manner by Hamas members, and that the only way to defeat Hamas is not to buy into their propaganda, that the Jews do everything to avoid civilian casualties. On average, the number of civilians versus the number of combatants killed in that conflict is lower, the number of civilians is lower than in similar conflicts that, let's say, NATO fought, America fought, other countries. There's no country that is being asked to hold to the standard that Israel is being asked to hold to. Not just double standard, triple standard. It's like unbelievable. There was this campaign about hunger in Gaza when Israel was actually trying to distribute food in a way that doesn't get to Hamas. And in the end, this campaign succeeded. You see that these organizations that tried to distribute food otherwise had to be closed because that was Hamas's condition. They want to steal the food and sell it instead of giving it for free to their people. But Israel, the ratio of the number of people who actually die in this conflict, who are combatants, is maybe almost the same or a little bit less than the number of people who die that are civilian. Now one might say that's also too much. Of course that's too much. If there was a way to avoid the war, that would be the best. If there was a way for Israel to avoid the war. But Hamas said they're going to repeat October 7th again and again. That's a real genocide. When they came, every place where they came, they destroyed everybody and tortured and burned babies, did horrible, horrible things. And what is Israel supposed to do? It's the most justified war, but Israel tried to fight in the best way possible that lowers the number of civilian casualties. If you could get to 1-to-1 ratio in common war today, especially in a war in cities, in places where there are a lot of civilians, it's considered very, very good. Nobody has the same numbers. When Americans bombed, I'm not even talking about when, let's say, Saudis bombed Yemen, parts of Yemen. There were so many casualties, nobody cared about civilian casualties, and you didn't see demonstrations in every college. Not a single demonstration, by the way, in any college says that we're pro two-state solution. Again, from river to the sea, this whole idea that Israel shouldn't exist. Are they going to commit suicide? Of course not. So this is the hypocrisy of the West. And again, we do have friends. There are a lot of people who support us. Absolutely, it's true. And I think that's the main rectification for the Western civilization, to recognize the truth from falsehood, to not spread these lies. And I'm not even talking about what is spread on social networking sites. You know, if New York Times and BBC are so horrid, you could only imagine. I mean, there's so much lies. Like people, for instance, in some other country, it could be Pakistan or something, or China, that are pretending to be Israeli soldiers or pretending to be living in Gaza. There's just so much lies. By the way, recently, I think X allowed you to see where the account is from. So you could see these bots are completely in a different place. A lot of it is generated content, but all of this is spread, and people again are influenced. Even in America, which was our friend and is still our friend in general, and still a lot of, especially younger people who sit on these networking sites, they're influenced by this horrid propaganda and all these lies, the libels, the blood libels of the modern day. And in the end, I want to read for you a commentary of Netziv, a sage who lived about 150 years ago in Europe. And he writes with regards to how Esau and Yaakov weep together. He says that indeed, Yaakov actually could have a wonderful relationship with Esau. At this time, he says Yaakov wept sincerely. And he says that when the descendants of Esau decide to be nice to us, and they accept us, then we also will recognize them and love them because they are our brothers. And similarly, we find that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the leader of the Jewish people, a recognized leader, the author of Mishnah, had a wonderful relationship with the then Emperor of Rome, Antoninus. There are disputes about which Antoninus it is. There are a few emperors who had one of their names as Antoninus, but the idea itself, we definitely could have wonderful relationship. We're trying to have peace. We want just peace. And that's why, again, Milei, this wonderful person, the leader of Argentina, wants to have, similar to Avraham Accords, have Yitzchak Accords, Isaac's Accords with other countries. Right? If Avraham is the common ancestor of our people and the Arabs, so the pact with the Arab nations is called Avraham Accords, then we could say that Esau, who is continuation of Yitzchak, the brother of Yitzchak, the brother of Yaakov, the son of Yitzchak, who is represented by the Western world, like I said, not necessarily physically, but definitely in Jewish theology, Edom and Esau have to do with the Western world. We could have good relationship, and once the Western world, the majority, will abandon the hypocrisy and will support us, I'm hoping for wonderful, wonderful relationship between all of us and peace and prosperity for everybody. May it be fulfilled soon.